committee right now. And so who we have present is Commissioner Ansari, Commissioner Batts, and myself at present. Before we turn the floor over to our financial update, I do to just briefly acknowledge that I think I can speak for all of our commissioners when I say that our thoughts and prayers are with George Floyd's family and his community. And it can feel quite insensitive right now, I think, to carry on with business as usual. But I know that we also must because of the mission of MDHA. But I do want to just acknowledge that to my fellow commissioners and our staff and to our residents who are people of color. I'm just so sorry for what you are all unjustly experiencing. You should not have to be living in fear and hurt or justifiable anger. And I think that, we have all been hearing the calls from protesters and organizers that our job is to be champions sufficiently investing in things like education and housing and health and communities and, the things that will prevent this expansive criminal justice system we have. And I think that we are trying to do that at MDHA through our Envision plans. But I think that we all need to take these events as fuel and to light that match so that we move faster and do more, and that we do it with deep interrogation of not perpetuating, more racist systems or structures or procedures. And we just all have to really, I think, do our part right now to do the best that we possibly can do to be a part of. And so with that, I did just want to make space for other commissioners if they want to say anything before we get started for the meeting. Okay. If there's no additional comments, we can get started then with the financial update.
So this is Jim, and Commissioner Thade, I want to thank you. I sent out an email along those same lines yesterday, and something we're all struggling with. And but our mission continues, and it's an important one. And the guts of that are our resources. I'm happy to report that our financial resources are in great health and great stewardship. We're working very hard to get this in a more intelligible, understandable presentation for you, because we do have a lot of complexity with 27 federal programs, 3 state and 2 local, along with the business line of parking and property management. But essentially the summary is at mid-year, we're ahead of budget and in better shape. We're tracking higher on gross revenue and lower on expenses. Our NOI is better. There's some detail items in there that go through the detail. The only area of financial business concern is our parking operations. Obviously, parking has curtailed. We do, as you'll see, as you probably saw in your packet, we have sufficient financial reserves to carry us for all our debt payments through most of this year. We're probably about too much short on the fiscal year right now on existing reserves. The good news is parking since mid-year has picked back up. Our monthly parking, which are long-term contracts, almost by themselves sustain all the debt. We only need a little bit of the daily parking to get over the hump, and that daily parking is starting to come back. So I'm confident we're not going to have any challenges making debt service payments, and at least breaking even in the parking garage. I'm not sure it's going to be as great a cash opportunity for us in cash flow as it has in the previous years. Other than that, I'll turn it over to Melinda for walking through the pretty thick presentation. But we're in great financial health, and especially for our families and employees. Continue to make payroll on time, all benefits rock solid, all pay rock solid, and we're tracking to take care of everyone. So with that, Melinda, if you're on, if you could just sort of give us highlights going through the budget, and then we'll take your questions.
Excuse me, Jim. Okay. Can I ask Melinda just a couple of questions before we get started, just to kind of frame the conversation? Because Melinda, is it safe to say that page 1 of the first set of financials reflects the consolidated financials of the organization, and every tab behind it is simply a subset of the numbers that are presented on page 1?
Can you hear me? The page 1 is just the MDHA managed properties. So it's just the PBRA properties and market rate properties that MDHA manages. It's the budget to actual comparison of the ones that are the 9/30 year end, which is the first 3 columns, and then the Levy Place, which is our LIHTC deal, that's a calendar year end. So no, it's just a portion of the entity-wide statement. The total statement of net position on page 7 is the one that has the MDHA is the whole entity as far as it's what we consider the balance sheet, and then the discretely presented financial statements as of March 31st, which is our LIHTC properties that are either in process or are being constructed. So the total column on page 7 is the entire entity. The first pages are just pieces of that. So.
Got it. So what you're saying is that from an operating perspective, from what I would consider a revenue statement or a statement of profits and losses, for lack of better words, there is no consolidated statement related to 6 months of operations. They are the sum of pages 1 through 6 discretely.
Right. We do have the consolidated on page 6. I'm sorry. We do have the consolidated statement of cash flows. So that's for the whole entity on page 6, and it compares to last March and then a September financial. Mr. Harbison he suggested, and we're working through, and obviously we're open to any kind of advice and recommendations from the committee or the board on how to better present it. But we wanted to show the major pieces of the income statement side instead of a consolidated, just to kind of break out the major functions of the agency. So this is kind of how we decided to do it for the first 6 months.
Okay.
So I gave you, I think the first, I didn't, these are not pages, the memo that came with the packet before we started with page 1 just kind of goes through and explains each page of the presentation. So again, Mr. Harbison talked about we are in a better position, and I'm using both. I have mine kind of side by side. So on page 1, obviously we're presenting the budget to actual comparison for the first 6 months of the MDHA managed properties, which are all the PBRA properties and with the market rate units included. And then so we're showing a net operating income, actual income for the first 6 months of $6.6 million, which is better than budget, about $800,000. So and I highlighted, there were some fluctuations that I felt like needed to be explained. Obviously, on A tab, or number A, or letter A, I guess, the overages in that area are due to the tornado damage that we had, mostly at Parkway Terrace. But we had received, in May, we received $400,000, our first installment from our insurance provider, insurance adjusters for that, to reimburse some of the costs that were incurred for the deductible, not deductibles, but some of the damage that we've repaired at Parkway and at Levy. And then we had some positive variances on C in the revenue, the HAP income. We've got a positive variance, budget variance for OCAP adjustments. They've been averaging about 2.2% at each site, and they all, depending on when we converted each property, is when that OCAP takes effect. So it rolls throughout the year, like I said, depending on when we converted from public housing. So we just need to do a better job next year of budgeting for that increase, whichever month it is for which property. So those were a couple of highlights on page 1 that I wanted to say. And then, like I said, we converted everything that we manage as of January 1st. Neighborhood housing was the last one to convert, and so as of January 1st, 2020, we started receiving HAP payments for neighborhood housing. So now all the properties are receiving PBRA HAP payments.
So
any
let me
questions
jump.
on page 1?
I just want to jump in and address Ailey's great question. The reason we present this first, Ailey, this is the part that we actually have a very large measure of control over in a business sense. As an example, our rental assistance business, the voucher business, essentially is a cost center. We only get the admin fees, excuse me, to pay for people. We have no control over even the amounts of money we receive from HUD. This is the part we have great control over. The other piece really that we have as a business on is the parking business, and that's run separately by SP Plus. So we present this as the area where we generate profit or cash flow that we use elsewhere. We really have no other generator within the entire revenue stream of MDHA. The other are programmatic admin costs, and they're essentially cost centers. They're not my way of thinking business. That's why we present this first.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, let's go. If there's no questions, we'll go to page 2, which is
Melinda,
our.
Melinda, I just have one question. I'm just curious, and I'm sure this is a simple thing to answer, but why do we not for Levy Place have replacement reserves or depreciation? Is it just simply because the window of time is so short? Do we book that later or something?
I think we booked that quarterly. So I think we had not done, we had finished up the audit in March for Levy Place. So I think it just hadn't been booked yet. So yes, we do book that though. It just hadn't, at that point it hadn't been. So.
Okay, thanks.
So page 2 then is it's the central office cost center, the first 3 columns, which includes the, all of the central office admin functions, executive, finance, affordable housing directive, and then the central maintenance crews are included in that too. So we ended the 6-month period with almost a $200,000 net operating income versus a $200,000 loss that we had projected. What we did end up doing for through March was we had some accrued developer fees that we've earned but not gotten paid out yet for Kirkpatrick Park. We're hoping that I think we got notice yesterday that we've got a final closing date on that FHA loan, and then Explorer School and then Basketball One in their construction budgets will be getting developer fees. So we went ahead and booked what we had earned as of that 6-month period in the first through March on that. And then some of the variances within the expenses, some of the significant things are with admin and tenant services. We just had we have positions that had not been filled. I know it's a challenge now with everything being, the offices being closed. I know HR is working hard to fill positions, but I think it's just been a challenge since March, obviously, to get things going. But that's the main reasons for those significant fluctuations. And then in the maintenance line, we had some expenses that for office renovations, things over in the construction building, and then things, communication upgrades in the collaboration center that were not budgeted for, but during the mid-year review, we're going to recast that and true those up for the year so that we can make sure that they're accounted for the fiscal year. And then the insurance in general, again, that's where we had some charges. I know Mr. Harbison has discussed it before, where we had paid out food assistance to residents after the tornado, and some hotel bills that we did get several contributions, donations from Pinnacle and other sources, but that's part of the overage in the general cost. Some of the food assistance that was not reimbursed or was not given to us from a donation. So, and then the last 3 columns are the rental assistance. It's just the admin budgets, like Mr. Harbison had talked about. That's our voucher program. So we've received about $131,000 less than what we had budgeted for, and that's due to just HUD prorations, we try to prorate what we're getting at the end of the fiscal year, or when we started the process last year, budget process last year about this time, and it was a little less than what we had anticipated. And then because of some HAP funding shortfalls, we've had to kind of decrease the amount of vouchers that we're putting on the street. So that affects our admin fee. We get paid for the amount of vouchers that we lease up. So those two things is, but we're within budget because we're operating almost at a break even on rental assistance because we had some positions that had not been filled, and so we had some savings in the expense column. So that's kind of an overview of the page 2. Is there any questions on those two reportings? No? Okay. I'm going to move on to.
Wait, Melinda, sorry, I think Aoli has a question.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, Melinda, can you just in 2 sentences explain what in the other income column, the $6,142,503, what is the source of that income?
That is management fees and bookkeeping fees that the central office, which is, like I said, finance, IT, HR, executive, we charge. Per the RAD agreement, there's a management fee that we can charge to the properties, the PBRA properties. So that mostly is the management fee, and then we can charge a bookkeeping fee per unit. And also any developer fees that we get in from some of the projects, the construction projects that we're doing, or LIHTC deals, that's where that money goes. So that goes to pay down the expenses, pay for the expenses of the central office. Okay. Also, the voucher program pays in a management fee and bookkeeping fee. And we do take the grants that we have, like CDBG and Home and PAPA and ESG, some of our grants that will allow a management fee, we do take a management fee on those grants also. But the majority of it is the property and the voucher program that pays in a management fee.
Got it. So at the end, I'll come back with a couple questions around categorizations of expenses. Okay, but I got it.
Okay. So so if you want to look like side by side, page 3 and 4 are the Freeman Webb managed properties. So page 3 are the properties that that Freeman Webb manages that are on a fiscal year end. And then page 4 is the Ryman Lofts property, and it's a LIHTC property, so it's a calendar year end. I just highlighted some variances. We are down lower than budgeted on revenue. Most of that is due to 10th and Jefferson, and it's just really for the month of March because of the damage to the roof. They had to move out 21 units. They had to take 21 units offline for the roof damage and water damage from the tornado. But our insurance adjusters are going to pay for loss of rents. So we haven't gotten that money yet, but so that'll help them, finish out the fiscal year. And then, sorry.
Melinda, does Freeman Webb get paid a fee on money that we collect from insurance agencies? I'm assuming this is basically business interruption insurance that the agency is receiving.
I would think if it's a loss of rent, they get paid based on rent collected. So I think if they get proceeds from loss of rent, that they would get a fee on that. So, but I don't think this is the first time we've ever had that. I'm sorry?
You think they would, or you think they would not?
Well, their management fee is based on rent collected. So I would think that they would, validly per our management agreement if we get proceeds from our insurance for loss of rents, they should get an admin fee on that. But I don't think we've gotten that far yet, but I would think that they would want one. But again, I don't know what the discussion has been with them on the loss of rent. So we can research that and let you know.
Yep. And technically speaking, who's filing that claim?
We are, MDHA. It's MDHA. It's in our insurance trust. It's part of our insurance trust. We're lucky because the insurance that we have for all of our MDHA-owned properties, it was a $10,000 deductible, but it was not per property, it was per event. So it was just $10,000 for all the damage, which I think we've estimated at about $4 million, you know, so we're working with our insurance adjusters and Jim Filgen to make sure we've got the information that they need to pay us. And we're hoping that, and I think I noticed this, noted it somewhere, that we're only going to be out maybe about $60,000, and it's for, the deductible was $10,000 for MDHA and $5,000 for Levy, because they're separate insurance since they're a LIHTC property. But and then some other costs that were not covered at Levy for like cleaning up some trees. But everything else we're hoping will be paid for and counting on being paid for by the insurance agency. So.
And what is their fee? Where is their fee in the expense line item? I don't. Are you calling it under disbursements? I don't see kind of sort of a fee line item for the manager.
It's probably in the administration. We just kind of rolled it up into broad categories, but I'm sure it's in administration. So that's where we, you know, we typically book our admin fee, management fee, and bookkeeping fee. The only thing that's over budget as far as significantly on the expenses disbursements is the service contracts, and we had asked, I think, Affordable Housing and MDHA had asked that there be extra security monitoring at Nan's place. I think there was an issue last year, and we're working on, I think there was a problem with the gate to the parking garage, and so we've gotten that fixed, and so, but we just had some extra security up there, and we've asked Freeman Webb to true up their budget, you know, to reflect that expense monthly for Nance. But overall, in the down below under cash flow, operating cash flow, we're at a $917,000 operating cash flow, which is a little bit lower than budgeted, but it's still a good, healthy result for the 930 properties. And then Ryman is showing almost $100,000 cash flow as of the 3 months, January through March. So.
So Jim, can you do me a favor and just kind of, then need to just send a note, kind of sort of what that contract is, because I'm doing just some simple math. I divided the administrative expense of $159,000 and took the total revenue as a denominator, and it's showing almost like 9.3%.
Okay.
On and again, I have no idea what's in the administrative number, because it looks like is that our manager is able to recover all of his expenses and employee benefits from the properties. They're not taking any risk on the marketing. All those other things flow through the income statement to MDHA. And so if I divide 159 by 1708, that number is 9.3%. Without having enough, without actually understanding what's going into that number, that feels like a very high cost recovery, assuming that all the expenses are being borne by the project for the operations of the project. So, I mean, I could be speaking out of turn, because it could be 15 catergories in that line item, but
it probably is, but I can look. We'll look. We'll break it down. We have it. We have the trial balances from, and we actually take their trial balances and load them into our Yardi system also. So I can give you the detail on what's in the admin. So you can see, because we break out the administrative fee is broken out separately. So
and when you say administrative fee, that is all being paid to a third party. That's none of our costs.
Right, exactly. Okay. We don't take a management fee on this because we pay Freeman Webb to manage these properties. So. Okay. So that's 3 and 4. If there's no other questions, we'll proceed on to page 5. And Mr. Harbison had talked about this briefly at the beginning. This is the Fifth Avenue, the arched parking garage, and I left the March actual in there just so you can see the effects from the transient parking and the revenue of, you know, obviously the COVID shutdown, but I think the year-to-date actual, I mean, we're still, if you go down almost to the bottom, kind of the 936,000 actual net operating income versus the 910 budgeted, and we're still to the good 26,000. Obviously, this is through March, so we only had the 1 month shutdown, but we've been working with SP Plus very closely. They're our manager of the parking garage. And if you see, like Mr. Harbison had talked about, if you look at March actuals, again, 228,000 of March revenue came in from monthly parking, and that has remained stable. So we are still getting those monthly parking amounts in. It's the transient, obviously, parking that has been affected the most. But we are able to. We've looked at already looked at April, and then we're waiting on May numbers. But we are at a break even. April is break even to cover the debt service, and then we had reserves on hand already before all this hit. We're at the end of March of 526,000. So as long as we keep breaking even, we'll be able to cover the debt. You know, hopefully through. I mean, we're hoping everything will come back, but hopefully through August, September. So, and then we'll have to look at it again. So, but I mean, we'll continue to update you guys on if there's anything that changes on this. But right now, the monthly parking is covering the expenses and the debt. So. Any questions for that on page 5?
Yeah, just a quick question. So if you were to look on the March budget and scroll down to the very end where it says net income of 68,289, regardless of whether that number is $1 or $1 million, what happens to that money after? Like once we pay our debt service, what does that money go to a reserve? Does it go back to general operating expenses? What happens to that money in the period after which the debt service is paid?
I mean, right now it's staying in an account. It's a surplus account. It's in MDHA's name. And what we've done, like we did last year, if it gets to a certain point, we can request a disbursement and bring it into MDHA, and that would go into the central office cost center to cover salaries, or it could go to whatever we need it to go to at that point. But I think last year we took maybe 800,000 from that account. So they like to keep a little bit in there just for, things like, if something comes up that they don't, that the management company didn't know about. So we try to keep a little reserve in there. But like I said, right now, I mean, you see as of March 31st, there was 526,000 in that surplus. And we kind of had kept that money in there just to anticipation that maybe we might have to use some of those funds if things, if things trend down worse than what we had anticipated, use some of those funds to pay down the debt or the base rent payment every month. So.
Got it. So what you're saying is that 68,000, essentially that money continues to flow into a reserve that's allocated to the project. And at any given period, we make a determination to take money out of their reserve, but our lender does not require a minimum reserve requirement. There's no structural things that require that. That's just our own prudent business practice.
I mean, as part of the base rent payment we make every month, there's a portion of that goes into replacement reserves and different accounts, but it's part of the monthly debt service. So yes, that's our money to take and do with what we want to do. So, okay.
And Melinda, we sweep that annually just as right after the audit's complete. And we're comfortable with the previous year's audit. We then sweep those funds on an annualized basis, and we predict that sweep. So you see the numbers we project out about a year for development and the cash generated. Mm-hmm. That's where this is a contributing source along with the cash sweeps off of all the PBRA contracts. And that time frame generally is about April to May, depending on the length of the audit after the fiscal year ends in September. So we get the audit done, we make sure the board's seen it, everybody's comfortable with it, and then we sweep the reserves. Mm-hmm. And we don't sweep all the reserves. We sweep 80% generally.
Right. Mm-hmm. So that's that. So that's page 5. So again, page 6 is the March 31st entity-wide cash flow. I've always liked the cash flow because it kind of tells a truer picture of the money that's flowing in and out of the agency. If you look at the top, the net cash provided by operating activities was about $3.7 million for the first 6 months. We're projecting, I think it'll show on the page 8 on our equity analysis, you know, we're projecting about an $8 million sweep of the PBRA properties for the year, and we're on target to be able to get that. So we're at 3.7 for operating, but then the total increase in cash for the 6 months was 4.5, and some of that was through obviously interest. We're earning some interest on our funds in the bank, and we had a little bit from financing activities, but most of our grants that are included in this entity-wide are reimbursements. We spend it, we get reimbursed from HUD. So most of the cash flow, obviously, that's getting generated here is from, and that's why we kind of presented the properties and rental assistance separately, and obviously the parking garage, because those are our main funding sources for the increase in cash. So any questions on this?
So Melinda, is it? I'm just trying to go from FASB to what we're doing in our cash flow statement. So is it fair to say that the $3.7 million, essentially the negatives that I see appear are the operating expenses? So I add up all the ends and I subtract all the outs, the 12, the 2, and the $44 million. That's really kind of sort of the expenses of the organization, 12, 2, and 44. And 3.7 really kind of reflects the cash flow position of the organization is $3.7 million. So when I look at when you look at page 1 and it shows, you know, page 1 shows, you know, net operating income of $6.6 million. What you're telling me is that somewhere, if that were the only thing I saw on a revenue line item, what you're telling me is somewhere between $6.6 million, and everything else that we do, we net out $3.7 million. Is that what that number's telling me?
Yes, that's what the number's telling me. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and you add in the interest too. So the interest income, so the 3.7 plus the interest income of the 711, Jonathan reminded me, that would be an operation also. So you're talking, you know, I mean, a lot of that is receivables, and it's a timing difference a lot of times. It's receivables, half receivables or tenant receivables, or even HUD government receivables from our grants that we have. It could be you know, at the time we had several receivables out there that had not been collected. So, but yes, that's true. Okay. So moving on, page 7. So again, this is the we call it statement of net position. That's what the auditors call it. I like to call it the balance sheet, but that's old school. So this takes the MDHA entity as of March 31st and adds in the discretely presented financial statements as of March 31st, which would be Levy, Boscobel 1, CP2, Boscobel 3, Victory Hall, Ryman, and Forest Bend now. And a lot of those properties are either in construction or have just come online. So that's why they're not included yet in the budget to actual on the first page. So we're working through getting those budgets formulated in the system. But so as of total assets or total net assets, as of the total assets for entity-wide plus the discretely was $663 million. A couple of things that I just kind of highlighted this morning, I'm looking at it on the discretely presented, the $19 million that's sitting in restricted cash. Most of that, 18.1 of that is a construction escrows that we had to with Pinnacle. Most of them are at Pinnacle Bank now, so it's money that either loan funds or money that MDHA put into the LIHTC deals that are sitting there for construction related costs. So that's why it's showing as restricted. And then if you work down the discretely presented column under accounts payable, that's what we, as of the end of the period that we're reporting, it's construction payables, that funds that were paid out to Hardaway and R.G. Anderson for construction pay apps at the LIHTC properties that MDHA we pay through MDHA account, and so we're just waiting to be reimbursed from the restricted cash funds. We have to do draws monthly, and sometimes that it's a timing difference on that for March. So that's why that payable is so large. It's a payable to MDHA, just kind of like we treat it as a due to, due from. But so that's what that is. So that if you look down at the bottom under net position, so net position for the total column is 234 million, almost 235 million for investment in capital assets, and that's the net fixed assets less any debt that we have on the properties. And then other restricted for other purposes is the funds, the replacement reserves, and that the properties have. Since we've converted to RAD, there's replacement reserve accounts we have to have set up for each property, and then any other restricted reserves, any restricted cash we're holding for the properties. And then the unrestricted net position as of March 31st is at almost 114.5 million for the year. And luckily, the balance sheet, the net assets do equal liabilities and net positions, so we always make sure that equals. So, is there any questions on this presentation, the balance sheet or net position statement?
Melinda, could you just address? Oh, go ahead, Ailey. Sorry.
Is it fair to say that the 114,463 in unrestricted net position is our cash balance? Not that it's all for, well, yes, it's our unrestricted net cash balance.
Right. Yes. Mm-hmm. And with some investments. So less any liabilities, that are booked. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's right. It's a net position. It's not a gross position. It's a net.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's the assets. It's the unrestricted assets less the unrestricted liabilities. So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Melinda, just quickly, could you the net fixed assets of 415 million? That's essentially our land and properties, and that's original book value plus improvements. So it doesn't reflect the true value of the real estate that we are in control of.
Right. It's cost. Any cost. Mm-hmm.
As example, all of Casey is something like $10 million on that book value. I may be off a little bit on that, but that's just to give you an example. So this position we have represents a very accurate financial accountant view of the world. It doesn't represent the market value of our assets.
Okay. So page 8 is, I think what you guys had gotten at the retreat, and I think Buck's going to it's a collaboration between finance and recap to come up with a equity analysis for the next 12 months, and kind of what I think Emily and Ailey have asked for, just to be able to make decisions on things like the Family Dollar purchase and all. But Buck, are you ready to? You have it up? Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yes, I'll chat on this and answer any questions. So this is our 12-month tool. It's one of our tools that we look at to try to project what development activities, envisioning activities are out there and how that affects our cash position. And so at the top of that is, I believe Melinda's indicated to us that we've got about $24 million of unrestricted reserves to look at for development and envision activities. And then from there, over the next 12 months, these are some of the expenses and some of the additions that all of the additions that we're looking at this reserve balance. And, some of the items on here, the Connect Home program, the Activity Center soft costs, Basketball 4 soft costs as we plan our next project, Envision Center operational costs, that's paying for a smoking cessation program. The Family Dollar purchases on there for June, and we expect to close soon. And then this is an add. So in June of this year, we're going to get another tranche of our home money to help pay for Basketball 2. So I can walk you down all of these items, and I don't know if that's necessary, but you can see the adds and subtracts and where we are at the end of 12 months. And I'm happy to answer any questions on any of these adds or subtracts on this tool as we look out over the year.
Yep, Buck. Thanks, Buck. Emily, do you have a question?
This is
I just wanted to get,
Oh, I'm sorry.
sorry, what did you say, LaTanya?
Ms. Coleman is on the line, but she's having issues. But she wants to know, can someone explain what bad debt expenses are on page 6?
Melinda, why don't we back up to that before we hop into this then?
Okay. So page 6, bad debt expenses, it's where the tenant, it's mainly tenant receivables. We write off tenant balances as when they've moved out, and we give them like two to 3 months for the HAP to work its way out. But after 2 or 3 months, we write off the receivables, unpaid receivables from tenants, and turn it over to a collection agency, Robinson, Reagan and Young. So when we do that, we go ahead and write those off as bad debts, and then any recoveries that we get off those bad debts go into other income. But that's what that is. As of 9/30, that's what what had been written off in the 6 months. So
Thank
that
you.
help, Tanya?
I'll let you know if she replies, but thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if we go back to the equity availability analysis, I just wanted to get an update on the Explore School. I know that they had incredibly ambitious fundraising goals, and I was wondering if we knew how that's going.
I talked to Marcia last week. They're ahead of budget and for their fundraising and have funds in hand to make their November payment. And they made their last payment last time on time. They've made all payments so far on time.
That's wonderful, Jim. Aioli, I know you had questions.
So Buck, thanks, Emily. So just the first just basic question is, so the 24,149 that start off at the balance, like how was that determined? Was that at the, like, where did that number come from?
Melinda, that's yours, but basically that's the summary of all the cash sweeps we've had previously, including the one we just made, and those cash values that we have unassigned. That's our reserve cash position that's unallocated. Since I've been here, I've set a floor of $6 million that we never go below, because that represents about the value that HUD historically has failed to fund us at any one point in time on all of our programs combined. Generally, that's CDBG and home that don't get funded on time. But that's just the, and we've been tracking this type document for 5 years, where we determine what cash we have. The main contributor to that cash number are the annual cash sweeps that come off the project-based real assistance properties and our developer fees. But Melinda, you want to go
Jim,
through?
Jim, how much runway does $6 million give us?
Well, $6 million is just for in normal operations for things that HUD doesn't do. HUD never funds home and CDBG on time. Never have, never will. I can go through why, just it's not ever going to happen. So that represents about a $2 to $3 million hit each year. What most people do is they wait until the funds come in and delay all their programming, and that puts them in a bind, because HUD also requires you to meet your expenditure and obligation dates. So it's a rigged game. They give you the money late, then you have to meet their timeline. We go on and execute as if HUD wasn't late, and then we meet all the timelines. We look good with them. The real question, I think, you guys, what happens if we hit a continuing resolution or we lose federal funding? You may recall, I think you were here when we went through this last time. When that happens, we quickly seek from HUD. We notify them that we believe the entire reserve for repair cash fund is available for operations, and that they are no longer funding the agency. And that value is roughly 60 million. So 60 plus this 20 gives us about 6 months of work. That was our analysis last time. We haven't done a deep dive on it really since the last CR. But the main issue we resolved then was notifying them that we intended to tap into the reserve for repair accounts and expected to be reimbursed, and notified them formally that was the case. and we did it before the CR. You know, they let you know the CR is coming, right? So it's going to happen on midnight on a Friday. We quickly get the letter out 3 to 4 days ahead of time. We work them hard to get an answer, and last time they gave us an answer that would be acceptable. Those funds could be used and they'd reimburse us. So that's kind of our and so really what I'm saying to the board is it's not just this money, it's the entire reserve for repair account, which, Melinda, what's that, 60 million roughly in our R4R right now?
It's about 50.5 now. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's a healthy number, and it carries us for 4 to 5 to 6 months, somewhere in there for sure. And that includes making our voucher payments, which is our biggest, be our biggest drain. Our biggest monthly drain will be the making good on the voucher payments to private landlords, which is critical because if they lose confidence in that program, they walk away. We don't know how many vouchers we have. We can't get apartments leased up. That's your question.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of us conceptualizing this as a board, I want to honor the fact that, like, we want to make sure that there's always 6 million sitting there for emergencies. That's really the floor that we're with. And so I'm wondering if we're showing these numbers less the 6 million. Let's just make sure that we always have that on hand for the purposes you explained. Just so that we're conceptualizing what's really there for us in terms of putting equity into projects.
Well, that's exactly how we've done it for, I don't know, 5 years. So we don't go below that number. So.
Yeah. So Bill, let's build on that just a little bit, because so now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find where in the financial statements that are presented to us that I might have expected to see in page number 7. Where is that $50.5 million number, Melinda?
It's in the restricted cash under MDHA, the 58 million cash restrictions. The second line under current assets, restricted cash.
Got it. So explain this number to me one more time, because let me just tell you what I thought I heard earlier. What I heard was that I understand exactly where the $19 million is coming from. These are obligations that we're contractually obligated to for other things.
Right.
But in the $58 million, when you say it's restricted for what purposes?
And let me jump in. So when we did the RAD conversion, we entered into project-based rental assistance contracts, which have statutory requirements to establish reserve for repair accounts, escrow accounts that are controlled by HUD Asset Management Multifamily. So every month, every property per unit makes a contribution to that property's accounts. And I think, as I've covered with you, we did a capital needs assessment of every property with a third party group out of Virginia. They identified not just what the needs are today, but those going forward for a 20-year life cycle. They established the initial contribution that had to be made by us into the reserve for repair account, and then the monthly contributions going forward based on things like an assessment of the brick, the pointing, the HVAC, roofs, et cetera. So for us to use this account, we have to meet the HUD rules, but it's for capital needs. So when you have a capital needs requirement to replace 70 HVAC units, you approach HUD, the asset manager approves it, you draw the funds down, and you don't draw those funds out of your maintenance and repair operational line, you draw it out of your reserve for repair line. So that reserve for repair account is controlled by HUD in a restricted way, and it's there, its purpose is there for repair of the properties. And it was a big deal to get them to relent in a crisis to allow us to use it for operations with the promise of replenishing that once the continuing resolution crisis ended.
And how much is that number?
How much is which number?
You just described a program that sits inside the $58 million. How much is that?
It's all of it.
Got it. So
that's across all of our properties. Each property has its own. That's the aggregate of 22 sites.
Got it. So what you're saying is that is not the money for which we do the $6 million calculation on, right? So
yes.
So what I was told is that the $24 million comes from the restricted cash. And what I'm hearing is actually not coming from the restricted cash. It's coming from the cash and equivalence line item just above it.
Right, that's true. Yes, it's unrestricted cash. That's
Exactly.
why we kind of That's why we have it available. And a lot of the 24, we just swept last year after the audits were done, we swept about 16 million from the sites last year. A lot of that was for the neighborhood housing. When we closed with neighborhood housing, we were able to roll all of the leftover public housing reserves that we had into neighborhood housing. So last year was a really large year for the sweep. So a lot of that was just done in March. So that's included in the 24.
Got it. So what we're saying is that the top number that we're showing in our forecast of kind of sort of cash flows is $24 million. And if I were to tie it back to the financial statements, it's coming out of the cash and cash equivalents line item in the first line of page 7, so what that means is that we would expect, before we did any future cash sweeps from any future project, it's at the very beginning of the period, right? We would expect to have $18 million left over in that account, not including from whether you sweep from all the stuff that, from the parking garage, stuff that's managed by third parties, blah, 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 blah. We would expect to have 18 million in that account, of which Jim is saying we need to have 6 million on hand as a reserve all the time, right? Which would bring us down to essentially a net cash position of $12 million before we swept anything from anything else in the project. And I'm not making an assessment of whether or not $12 million is good or bad. I'm just saying that's just a number. Is that a fair interpretation of what was presented?
I think I need to take it for record meet separately because I'm not sure, I kind of got lost in it, but the 24 million, Melinda and Buck, is cash. It's unrestricted. I got to tick and tie back to where it is on the other sheets. The 6 is just an internal control mechanism for us.
Yep.
It could be 0. It would just mean we'd still programmatically execute. We just have to adjust how we do some of the programs. So it's sort of an artificial, sort of just a fire break I established. There's no statutory programmatic requirement. It's just a management tool we use to keep enough slack to make sure that we'd have something if something unexpected occurred. I'm not sure what the numbers of subtracting. I have to think about that. I'm not sure what all that meant. So, but 24 million is the cash we have to play with today.
Right, and I'm simply trying to figure out where's the source of the $24 million, right? And what you're saying is there's 2 items for which, when we think about what we do in the future, it really happens, the place where it happens is really the $42 million, which is the very first line item on page 7, right? Because what we're hearing is, and it's not a good or bad, it's just trying to understand the statement. In fact, I'm making no judgment about whether it should be 6, 10, 2, 0, or whatever. I'm just trying to understand it. So we're just saying at somewhere in the period, we have $42 million. Then I turn to page 8, right? And we said, well, we're committing 24 of that $42 million to all the things that lie below, right? So if I take out all the positives, right, those are the future things we expect to get in. But at the beginning of the period, we don't know what those numbers really are. They're just projections. And so basically what I'm saying is our unrestricted cash position is 42 minus the 24. And Jim, you have said this as a buffer. We're just going to keep $6 million because we know shit happens. And we keep a $6 million buffer. And so we're really committing to 30 million of the 42 before we see any future performance from other assets. That's the only thing I'm trying to understand. Is that a correct way to assess what's at hand?
I guess the 42 is, maybe I'm mixed up. The 42 is just a snapshot at a time. You've got 42 in the bank account, but there's a good amount of that might tomorrow be gone because you're paying payables, et cetera. And so
that's not what we're saying.
So part of the, you're right, exactly. I mean, the 24 is in the 42, but part of the 42 is like, for instance, March 31st, we might have had some excess TIF funds that we had that are not considered restricted because they're not in a restricted account, but they're restricted for the TIF program. So they're kind of, So they're in unrestricted cash. So we do have some instances where in the entity-wide where people have cash, but it's restricted for their own purposes. Like home grant, for instance, a couple of years ago, they let you, you could bank your program income. So home right now has some cash, but it's just to be used for home-related transactions, but it's in unrestricted cash. So, but you're right. I mean, the 42, if you take out the 24 and leaves us the 18, so 18,000 of that is in other programs, but it's not considered restricted for financial statement purposes.
That's right. That's right. And Jan says, as a prudent director, I want to reserve another $6 million of that number because I know HUD won't fund everything. That's
right.
all I'm trying to. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep. Like
That's true.
There's no judgment. There's nothing to defend. It's just a mathematical calculation. Got it.
Okay.
Got it. And so what that would mean, so what we were saying, so because I'm just trying to jump to the end without going through every line item, because the line items aren't as important to me as really where the cash flows are. So what we're really saying is that we started off with a $24 million balance, and then speaking the buck at this point. And after we spend all the money we expect to spend, we would also expect to collect money, right? The 2020 sweep gives you some money. The National Housing Trust Fund gives you some money. Explore Basic School gives you some money, blah, 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 blah. So are we really saying is that for the money that we put out, right, we almost collect as much back because this is the balance at the end of the period is $25 million.
That's right. And you know, this between us, we call this the bathtub chart because it shows, and there's another pictogram that goes with this that shows the level of the water, if you will, in the bathtub. And so this just shows that money goes out and money comes back in, so that at any one time, if we've got to put $12 million of equity into a project on a given day to close a loan, put it in escrow, we want to know on that day what the impact is to our cash position. And so that's what this chart helps us do. And in the other part it shows us is that, you know, how do my grants and my developer fees and my other LIHTCs, when I get those, how does that affect my cash position in a month-to-month basis? Because, you know, that it matters when we close a loan, for example. It matters when we get our payment from Martha O'Brien for Explorer School. So, you know, we just wanted to have that level of fidelity on a rolling monthly, you know, chart to show us what our cash position is. That's easy for us to understand, and not to, this is not incriminating on Melinda, but sometimes those charts don't help us know exactly where we are from a planning perspective. It's looking backwards, not forwards. And so, you know, we've got to look forwards when we plan these projects and pick the date that we're going to close a loan or pay for something based on how the money's coming in. Probably too long of an explanation, and I think you guys get it, but that's what this chart helps us do from a planning perspective, 1 to 2 to 3 years out, as we look into the future on what we think we can try to do from a development standpoint.
That's right.
That's well said. I just want to emphasize this is a planning tool. It's not an accounting tool. As an example, I met with Ralph Perry last week. We're pending the possible award of a 9% LIHTC, which we could learn about this month. And that would change this planning tool pretty significantly. But we don't include those planning items in until we have, you know, fidelity on the award. So this thing varies pretty significantly over time. And what you see here, what we would present to you last month would look somewhat different probably. So, and it may look very different next time we show it to you. Maybe we hopefully will be including a 9% LIHTC award from THTA of a significant value that will change our planning as we move forward. So it's a planning tool, not an accounting tool.
That's right. But all I'm trying to understand is that just like your checking account, the money has to either be in the account or you have to plan for it to be in the account. And all I'm doing is just tying the numbers. And so, like I said, there is absolutely no judgment in this. It's simply just trying to to tie the numerical assumptions to the financial statements that we've been given. And because this is actually a positive story. What this says is that if we do everything we want to do during this fiscal year, right, we expect that all of our development activities, right, to actually not diminish our cash position by year's end. This is what this is telling me, right? It says we thought we were going to spend $24 million. We're actually going to spend less than that once we collect the money we think we're going to collect. Instead of it being 42 minus 24 for a net position of 18, what we really think is we're going to have almost a $44 million balance in cash and cash equivalents at the end of the year. This is actually a good story. It just doesn't come out as a good story because it's hard to figure out, right? Because we start off with 24, we have a bunch of outs and we have a bunch of ins, and that account ends at 25, which is greater on the positive side than where we started. And we've done all the things we said we wanted to do in the period.
Right. Agreed. Right. And this is the way that you know, whenever we want to do something, or Mr. Harbison has an idea, or we, you know, get an opportunity to purchase some land, we go to this chart and go, can we do this? How does this affect this year's budget, and how does it affect next year's planning? And so, you know, Matt Wilshire is our strategic planner. You know, we're looking at this for this year, and, you know, and how it goes out into the forward, so we can keep momentum going on our development, and not, you know, this is, you know, we don't turn the faucet on too wide open, and we don't shut it down. And this chart helps us to know how wide open or closed to make the faucet as we do our development.
Got it. Yep. Cool.
So Buck, we've also, oh, sorry, Aioli, go ahead.
So just a final question comment. So if I were to look at this chart and look at all the financials that are being presented, what we're seeing is the biggest risk to our cash position as an organization is the amount in the 2020 sweep, right? It's the biggest number in it. And what we've heard in the previous conversations is that that's dependent upon the performance of the parking garage, that's dependent on the performance of the third-party managed stuff, yada, 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 yada. So if I were to look at this from a risk perspective, I'd be asking, so how confident are we that we're going to get $8 million?
So, you know, from the COO position, this is something that us in finance and affordable housing and Joe Kane, we look at this every month to make sure we're hitting our budget. And our budget is backing into that $8 million number. So, you know, I don't put it as a sweep, a potential sweep, unless I know that our budgets support that. And so every month we are like, are we on budget? Is every property, is every business enterprise hitting their number to show that we're going to get to that $8 million sweep? Because the bathtub chart and future development is based on that sweep. And so that's something we, you know, and hopefully Melinda, camera's not on, but she's nodding, that we know where we are when it comes to of that eventuality. And that's why right now we're at $6 million. So on budget. So we're comfortable with that sweep going forward.
And we typically, you know,
that's good. That's good.
Budget low.
That's good.
We're very reserved on that. So. Mm-hmm.
Nope.
So, Buck, we've obviously made commitments with these unrestricted funds beyond March of 21, and it would be really helpful for me if we could actually see those future commitments, knowing that we don't have everything filled in the bathtub chart quite right for predicting future, you know, sources of revenue. Just to make sure that, like, we're really staying on top of what we've committed to what moving forward in the future. So could you add that to this at some point, just so that we're tracking that as well?
Yeah, we can, and I'm absolutely ready to show that to you. But those aren't commitments; those are assumptions, projections. And so, while we may be doing some soft cost work to do a planning for a project, if we're not committed to doing that in 2021. We would like to, and we will, you know, and I, you know, present development plan for 2021 in draft form to Mr. Harbison the next month, so that we can project what 2021 and 22 are going to look like. But, you know, we can plan a project, have it ready to construct, and not construct it because we don't have the funds, and it'll roll to the next year or to whenever we get the funds. So I think I just want to hesitate to use the word commitment, because until we close a loan, until we accept a LIHTC, we're not committed to that project.
So,
Absolutely makes sense, Buck. And like that's actually getting to the exact question for why I'm curious to see that information, which is, you know, when do we potentially get tight financially, and does it in fact slow us down, and when? Based upon our projections and, you know, best guesses and estimates of our future. So anything else you can share with projections, not commitments, would be helpful.
and for the board, you may recall in January, we gave a complete presentation of every project contemplated with this financial assessment. At that point, for example, we had a thing called the library, and we were pursuing new market tax credits, working with Metro. You'll notice not on here now. So we removed that. It was never a commitment. It's a planning tool. And we provide every month updates on the pending projects, and they're not commitments until after you voted to accept them, but they are being planned. There's some cost to the planning. The library now, we've put a bow on it. We've got it parked. We're hopeful at some point in time that we'll work out with our partners moving forward with it. But that's a good example of how these things work. Randy Rogers, under construction today, we started planning in 2014 on. He was in this planning tool. We had to park it because of historical issues locally, and we parked it for 4 years. And when the time came available, we pulled it off the shelf, dust it off. It goes back in the bathtub chart, as we call it, back in the planning chart, and we move forward. So you're going to see projects come in and out. We're going to brief you on them every month. They're only final when we close. But for you, they're not final till you vote on them, and we give them to you every time for a vote. So that's really for us the final determinant, but there's a lot of planning has to go into them. They have costs associated with planning. We track those here. So I hope that answers questions on it, but we do present those as
yes. And Jim, the utility of this is not, I think we all completely understand that these things are going to change, right? Not every deal is going to carry. For me, I've been feeling like I'm making financial decisions and voting on things for the organization in one-off deals without seeing that bigger picture and knowing what's on the horizon. So that's why I think it's just so helpful to have more information, not less, even though we understand that those projections or estimates or, you know, planning and timing is going to change over time. It's the context that's so helpful for us in terms of the decision making. So Buck, thank you very much for that. And Melinda, thank you for your presentation as well. Do you have any other comments or questions related to the financial presentation? Okay. Melinda?
I just said thank you. Thanks for your comments and questions. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Melinda, my final comment is we understand this is just so much work, and it is it's very, very challenging as board members to obviously understand how complex our budget is. Any additional annotation, narrative, and notes that you can actually provide in writing in advance, it's tremendously helpful because I think that, you know, it's hard for us to wrap our brains around all of this. So I would just ask that you reflect, especially upon the questions that Aoli asked, and think about if there's additional narrative that you can be providing in these presentations in the future to just help us unpack some of these numbers. That way we can come more prepared with questions rather than just information.
Okay, so I sure will. Yeah, and we can talk about, or you guys can give me some input if this is I mean, we've been kind of working on it for a past month and a half, I guess. I mean, with Mr. Harbison trying to get a presentation that answers some of the questions you had previously, and with giving you as much information as we can, as simple as we can. So anything that, if you have any comments or recommendations, I guess, for presentation in the future, you can let me know, and then we can adjust it.
Thank you. And I do appreciate how much work you all have put in to trying to keep this as simple as possible, and the added explanations you did do this time. So thank you for
And
that.
we'll add extra based on the conversations today. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so
Emily, can I
yes.
make a recommendation to you as a chair? I think we should set aside one of these finance committee meetings to actually scope out and say, what do we want the financial presentations to look like, right? I think it'd be, instead of having, Melinda and everyone else kind of sort of work in the box and come back and say, well, here's what we did based on what we thought you said. Does this really work for you? I think what we should do is try to figure out, how do we get in a very graphically oriented format, right? Charts and tables that says there are 7 programs, which are page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and there's a revenue bar, and then right next to it there's an expense bar, and the expense bar is colored, and it says expense 1, and you get to see very quickly that your expenses as a percent of revenue equals that. You can just see it on the table, right? And you don't have to go through every number in the statement of cash flows and net position. Here's our position 1 versus where we are. The bar either got higher or it got lower. If it got higher, we're probably improving our cash position. If it got lower, we probably don't have our cash position looks a little bit different. And so I feel like there's a way to present this information in a much more digestible format that allows people to see the infographics of what we're doing. And I think we should dedicate a meeting to say, okay, what would we like that to be? So the executive team is not guessing and saying, well, does this work for you this time?
No, to the chairs, this is Bill Purcell. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I mean, I think it's listening mostly, obviously. I understand exactly, and I appreciate what both of the chairs have said, especially here at the end. I've suggested to Jim, frankly, that in the next days, certainly the next couple of weeks, there's an opportunity, rather than taking a finance meeting, each of the chairs can, and there's an opportunity to meet with the entire finance team, or whatever portion of it is required, for 2 purposes. One, and this could be, frankly, a regular meeting in advance of this meeting. That's typically what's done in the Metro Council, in the legislature, for the chairs to have the opportunity to have the conceptual questions resolved beforehand, so that you can then dig into the questions that you really have, that the full committee would be responsive to, especially as to the way in which presentations are made, planning is made, and the designation. This chart, this planning document, looks like an accounting document, but it's a planning document that is not recognized by generally accepted accounting principles. It relates to in a fashion, but isn't included in a way that's normally understandable within any other documents that we have. But so the titles, the presentation, the charts, all of that, I think the chairs, frankly, would be in a good position to meet individually with Jim and the finance team here, and resolve that, and get it into a place, and then bring it to the committee and see how the committee reacts to it, rather than and that would be my advice to the chairs. On the larger issue that Emily raised at the end, I mean, the comparable is the capital improvements budget in the Metro Council. And Matt Wiltshire may have that number in his head. Matt, what is the current capital improvements budget total? Do you have that number?
It has been as high as $8 billion. I think today it's slimmed down a little bit to 4 or 5. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head.
So it's a very important document because it includes all of the desired projects of all of the city and all the things you'd like to do. And it's terrifically worthy to annually review the capital improvements budget and add things and subtract things. But on the other hand, if one were to look and dwell on the capital improvements budget, one would think there is no opportunity or chance in our lifetimes that amount of capital will be raised for all of those projects. It's a function then of the council and the mayor sorting against that, given the resources that are available. I think we have, and you did a nice job as chairs, teasing out what this other document is. These are the things we are going to do unless something changes in the year ahead, and we're in a position to cover those things. I also understand, like the council, the larger Metro Council, we want to know what else is out there. But I do think if we are monthly looking at all of the things that we might hope and wish to do in all of the developments that we're thinking about, well, I think it's problematic because that indeed is not what's ahead. So I think that's something else the chairs could work on, which is sorting that larger list of things that we would hope for and those things that we are still thinking about. The planning that we have paused, that's going to, those are all needs down the road, no question about it. But thinking through how you present what we have in the fiscal year ahead, what we would then like to do in the fiscal year that follows, or even two. And then again, annually or more often as you choose, look at all of the things we would hope and dream to do over all of these projects over as far into the future as we can see. But I do think without that separation, we get into a discouraging and not very useful and possibly more complicated discussion than is productive for the larger committee. At least that's one member's opinion. Thank you, Matt. Thank you to the chairs.
And I think your points are fair, Mayor. I think part of the challenge that I think you're seeing is typically in businesses that I've tried to work through and or run is that I try to separate what is operational performance and what's business planning, right? And so what we've never what we do is we present financials, right, as a rear-looking snapshot to what we've done. It says, here are all our numbers. It all looks pretty good and great, right? What we've been struggling to get ourselves into, which I think we're in a position now, is the bathtub chart that Buck presented. In a perfect world, that's being presented to the full board well before the fiscal year starts, right? Because what happens is that you're asking us to vote, or the executive team is asking us to vote on the acquisition of a building at the end of Shelby, right? But no one had any idea of what the full position of and what we wanted to do on a future-looking component. And so I think I don't think it's just as simple as the individual board members working with Jim or working with Buck or working with, I think it is two things. It's really actually trying to understand is how do we want to govern as it relates to finances, right? And I think there's a very separate capital discussion around here's the capital we have on a go-forward basis. How do you create more of it to do more projects conversation as opposed to saying, okay, here's the operational stuff? Because I think as a board, we should be spending 10% of our time going through operational stuff and 90% of our time is saying, are we doing the things that we want to do for the future of the organization? Is where I think Emily, well, I'll take that back. I can't speak for Emily. Is where I think I would like to be, as a committee and as a board, be focused.
I hear you and I agree. And I think what I was proposing only is that for the purposes of presentation and understanding the documents that we have, there's an opportunity for the chairs to work directly with the staff to make sure it's usable by the full board. And I trust that you will do that to the advantage of all of us. And because that, as you said, because that wasn't as clear as you had hoped and I would have hoped for you, that you ended up having to dwell on the operational as opposed to the larger issue that you'd really like to get to in the committee meeting in the time we have. So I agree with you altogether on that. And I think on the larger issue, the retreat highlighted just what you're talking about, and both chairs were clear about it then. And it's a work in progress, but that's what we should be moving to, an understanding of not just where we are, but where we need to be in the near, medium, and long term. And are we on track or are we not on track? And what do we need to do to change that trajectory? I'm with you.
Thank you for all of those comments. All right, with that, let's move on to our next agenda item, which is the Public Housing Authority Plan.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
So the Public Housing Authority Plan, I want to make sure everyone understands its purpose. Its genesis is the 1937 Public Housing Act. It is not the plan for the entire agency, MDHA. It is a federal requirement of the public housing activities that reside and remain in MDHA. And public housing is governed under the Public Indian Housing Act in a separate lane, generally called Section 9. It also includes the voucher program. Now, HUD has worked over a number of years to streamline this plan, and for many housing agencies, this is a critical plan because all they have in their inventory is public housing. As the board, I think, is aware, we left public housing behind completely at the end of December of last year after a multi-year process of converting from public housing to privately owned multifamily project-based real assistance housing under a separate financial stream in HUD. So as a result, this plan largely focuses on our voucher program and addresses those specific requirements from HUD for submission and timing and detail, most of which are relatively straightforward and unchanging year over year. These streamlined requirements, Jim Thilgens handled very well, and I'll leave it to him to go through the detail, but I wanted to make sure that the board understands and the committees understand this is not the MDHA plan for its activities. This is a federally required report, if you will, on a plan for those remnant activities that fall under public housing rules, regulations, and statutes. So Jim, would you like to cover that with the board, please, in addition to the nice write-up you provided?
What I'll try to do is just kind of summarize the write-up, but in the 1998, Congress adopted a requirement that there be an agency plan for public housing and for Section 8. It was a comprehensive plan when it came out. I think our plan was 30 or 40 pages. Some housing authorities went to 100 pages or 200 pages. It had tables about what the housing needs are, broken down by ethnic group and by income group and so on. It was really a comprehensive plan. In subsequent years, it's kind of rolled back. The proposed use of capital funds came off. The format for the plan itself is reduced. And as Jim mentioned, our public housing kind of rolled off. The PBRA is not included in this plan. And so it's kind of somewhat of a ghost of a plan. Unfortunately, the procedural requirements remain the same as it had been before when it was a very elaborate kind of plan. And so 45 days prior to a public hearing before the board, we're required to put the plan out, make it available to the public, take comments. We give a 45-day notice for a public hearing before the board. Even when we had a complete plan, no one ever showed up for the public hearing. There was never any comments provided, but we still have to go through the procedures. So at the July meeting, July board meeting, after the meeting adjourns, there will be a reopening of the public hearing before the board. If there are any comments received either in writing or verbally, they will be incorporated into the plan that is submitted to HUD. We will come back to the board in August and ask them to approve the plan. We'll submit it to HUD. HUD has something on 5 days after that to approve it. Normally, HUD doesn't even look at it until 75 days is up and the plan becomes automatically approved. So this is just kind of a heads up that there will be a public hearing before the board in July and an approval of the plan in August. The plan is basically 4 to 5 pages, and all it really does now is talk about the progress we've made against the 5-year goals that we established last year for the Section 8 program. It's very limited. It's almost embarrassing to call it a plan, but it is a requirement that we go through the motions and that we submit this document to HUD sometime in August. It's simply a heads up of what's going to be coming for July and August.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions related to that item? Okay, moving on to the substantial amendment to the
Am I on? No. I am on.
Yes, I think we lost Emily.
We lose Emily? Okay, well, let's wait for a second. Robbie, can you see if you can get her back, or just something you can do? No, it's all on her end. Okay.
I think she was just calling Amel right to his section.
Right, and so we've got some work. So just quickly then, we have Bill Purcell, we have Aioli, we have Ms. Batts, and is Paulette or Bishop Campbell on? Trying to get an indication how many
Yes, sir.
people we have. Okay, we've
Yes,
got
sir.
Bishop
I'm on,
Campbell.
Mr. Harbison.
Super. And Antoinette, are you on?
I'm on.
Okay, so for Saul, I think we still have a quorum for finance, and I'm sure Emily will rejoin us. Is it okay if we proceed?
Yeah, it's okay to proceed. And we actually got a quorum now for development if we want to convene that.
Okay, so Aioli, could you convene development, because we can consider the CARES Act funding under a development action item. We'll have to amend the minutes here and how we structure a little bit, but we do need a vote on what we're doing on CARES. And I've got a verbal amendment to this, a sort of late breaking request from the mayor's office that I want to walk through. So Aioli, can you convene? How do we do this, Saul? How do you want to do this? Latanya, are you calling Emily right now? Can you please?
As one member of both committees, I advise not moving the finance of CARES discussion over into development. I think it should stay with finance. I just think we should. I think we should just find the chair and move forward. Is a vote required?
We were looking for a vote on the CARES, but we can run that on Tuesday because there's some discussion. So I think we should probably, in the absence of the chair, we'll just move that to Tuesday. And that gives us to redevelopment, but the redevelopment is a pretty long topic. And that does fall, I think, under development category. We could cover it there, but it's also pretty lengthy, and I'm looking at the clock.
It does.
So maybe you and Aioli wanted to confer on that.
Yes, and to our development chair, this was something that I have requested, and it came out of our retreat, and it is a big item for both educational and level setting going forward. It's the real discussion, not simply about it's very much in the space we were just talking about. Not only what have we been doing and what do we want to do in the year ahead, but what are our abilities, rights, what are our other agencies doing, what's the rest of America doing in this space, and what do we see for the long term? And that I think it doesn't require any action by us at this point. But I think it is something that we will not get close to touching. Joe Kane, as fast as you talk, I don't think you're going to get through that and allow us to have the understanding that we need for in 20 minutes or less. I just don't think that's possible. And it's so much more than design review and TIF and the like. All of which is there, and each of which can take 15 or 20 minutes by themselves. But so my advice would be to postpone this until we can have the conversation, and ultimately the conversation with the full board, so that we come out of it understanding both where we are and where we're planning to be, and back to the questions that both chairs have asked: where should we be? Where should we be planning to be? What benchmarks should we be applying to it? So I would. As one member of the committee, I would propose deferring redevelopment to begin next week, with the understanding that most of the work will be in the full board meeting, because we're educating the full board on policy and going forward. The report that we have, let me just say quickly, I've reviewed both the report and the underlying statute, some of which is set out in the report and some of which is not. The descriptions of blight are present. But the larger language of both the state legislative language and others that provides for the actual rights and abilities are not set out in the report. So I think it would be good to have some more complete foundational information, and there is no conversation in the report about what best practices in America, what others are doing, and the way in which especially land use is applied as a description or ability of the agency to move in addition to design review. So that's not in the report as we have it. And I mention it now because it's an issue I would raise whenever we take it up. I'm just one member of both committees, and whatever y'all want to do on that, but I think you'll have difficulty having a meaningful conversation about that topic in the time that remains.
Is Emily back?
Yes.
Yes.
I am back, and I believe Aoli was speaking, but you're on mute.
Emily.
No, I was saying, Mayor, I agree with that. I think my approach might have been for the last 20 minutes is now that Emily is back on, I think the CARES Act, I think we should delay that until next week. I think what we should try to do is to get through agenda items 6 and 7 in the remaining 20 minutes. So I think they're very well understood among the members of the board and the development committee. Let's move through 6 and 7. And with that, try to adjourn the meeting at 10:30.
Thank you, Aoli. And I'm sorry, can someone get me up to speed why we skipped over the action plan?
I think the action plans, first of all, we're going to need a vote, and we didn't know if you were going to be back, and we wanted you here for that mainly. We've been working closely with the chief operating officer of the city. What we're going to ask you to vote on, there's some slight amendments that I need to get in writing to you. They're not real substantive. Basically, we now have a 3-phase approach. The first is unchanged from what we presented to you based on the community input in the surveys and requests from the mayor's office. They'd like a focus on homelessness, and we have an approach to that, and on small business. And we just need to give the write-up a little bit of change. This has been a daily ongoing conversation for the last week, and we finally kind of got some closure on it here in the last few days, and we'll have that ready for you on Tuesday. So I'd ask that we defer that till Tuesday. And I think Aoli's recommendation is a strong one. I'd recommend we move forward on 6 and 7, which are familiar to the committee.
And this is Bill Purcell again. I'm wondering, from the committee standpoint, on the regular board retreat request review, is that something that the committee thinks needs to come before the committee and be on your agenda, or would it be better simply to have it as a regular agenda item on the full board, so that the full board can look at where we are in terms of the questions they had, the retreat scope and fulfillment? It can be both places, but it occurred to me as I'm sitting here that it might be easier and more inclusive to do it one time as a board, since we were all together at that retreat as a board. But that's just totally up to you.
I wholeheartedly support that. I think it should be on a regular board meeting.
Again, I'd like to recommend that it's just there as a standing agenda item. Where are we? And back to, this is Aoli's point. It's a dashboard and a small report, but here we are. Here's how we're doing, and then we can add to it when we have new items and new things we care about. We can add it to the agenda. It doesn't have to be a static document, but the board can decide that going forward.
Yeah, and then we can refer tasks out to committees when relevant. So I think that's a great idea. Okay, so with that, sorry, Aoli. Oh, with that, can we move on to the Trolley Barn Garage GMP?
Sure. So Buck will cover this in detail, but just as background, the Trolley Barns Garage is part of the Rolling Mill Master Plan. Redevelopment's been going on for 20 plus years. Pretty sophisticated parking agreements that have to be accommodated, and this allows us to free up 2 parcels, one of which we have a development agreement with the Hensler Group for sale. This allows us, when complete, to free those up and remove the parking encumbrances that exist from agreements we inherited or were negotiated prior to me getting here. So this is the actual cost of building it. So Buck, can you cover the Trolley Barns, please?
So Brent Grubb is going to cover it. He's in the details of the guaranteed maximum price. We are going to need a committee decision on this because we're ready to finalize the loan documents and the GMP to go forward with this project in the month of June. So Brent, go ahead. Latanya, you might have to unmute Brent.
Okay, that's why. Okay, can you hear me now? This is Brent Grubb.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is Mr. Harbison Buck saying in the April committee meeting, they made a presentation to you regarding the history of the parking garage. So where we're at now, the contractor has submitted to us a guaranteed maximum price of $12 million. Whoops, let me share something here. Find the right document. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, guaranteed maximum price of $12,380,088. That GMP is based on approximately 85% construction documents. It also includes a $354,966 contractor contingency, which will be controlled by the owner. It can't be spent without our approval, and the contractor's $30,000 pre-construction fee. We have also in the overall budget a contingency of $617,500, bringing the total project budget to $14,215,616.80. The other item we're looking at from a financing standpoint is to enter into a construction loan agreement with Pinnacle Bank in the amount of $11,895,186. So it's still the only changes, minor changes from what you saw in April is the garage with more finalized planning is at 378 parking spaces. It's a 5-story concrete building, and the cost also does include improvements to Leah Avenue as well as improvements to the parking access for the surface parking behind Ryman Lofts, as both those will be used as access for ingress and egress for the new parking garage. The sources, MDHA intends to put in $2 million of the unrestricted funds. And in the construction loan that I mentioned earlier, $11,895,186, as well as there's an MOU being drawn up between TV Partners, who will eventually be operating the garage, and MDHA because of additional security things they've asked for as part of the scope of the work, which were outside of the agreement for the parking garage in the original MOU. And the amount of that right now is $320,431. Any questions?
Yeah, so this is a quick question for Buck, and I'm just trying to tie, and again, I'm just trying to, because there's no judgment in this question. So should I have expected to see the $2 million unrestricted into your equity availability analysis that was on page 8, that outgoing your bathtub?
Yeah. Yes, it's there as a $950,000 early release package ERP and $1,050,000 for construction costs. So in order to get some,
that's perfect.
Yep.
That's perfect. That's perfect. You're saying yes, it is there. Yep. And then the additional 320 that's there, is that coming from MDHA as well?
No, that's coming from the Trolley Barnes Partners. That's adding some additional gatage, some fencing, some items that they wanted to put additional security on that garage, so that after hours, it's not an opportunity for other folks to make that a home. So that's something that they elected to do, and they're paying for that.
Got it. Got it. So the final question, Buck, on this, just real quick, is I thought in our last meeting, there was a whole bunch of conversation about a developer having to perform to certain things to help us get our money. Is this the same project? Is that connected to that PowerPoint presentation you gave us at the last meeting?
Right. So Mr. Hensler will pay us for the purchase and sell agreement at 90 days after completion of the project. He is required to pay us $17 million for Lot K. And so this shows where that comes in. And that $17 million pays off our construction loan with Pinnacle.
Got it. And as I recall, there's a bunch of periods where he could extend and could do all these other things for a period. Are we still under our original assumptions as for when he's going to close, or has the developer kind of sort of exercised any of his options or indicated, or there's been no change?
So in the purchase and sell agreement, it's 90 days, and he has 2 opportunities to extend, and then he loses the option to buy the property. So 5 months after the project is complete, he's got to pay us or not. And he's got to buy those extensions is $50,000 and $100,000 for extensions. Now, the next agreement was the construction development, and that gets to he's got up to 2 years to develop the property. And then if he doesn't do that after 24 months of extensions, then he has the option, or we have the option, to buy the property back from him and then resell it. So if he doesn't do his development after 2 years after he purchased the property, then we get it back, essentially. And that is the discussion that we had back in April on this project.
Okay.
Thank you, Buck.
And I would just add that in the resolution that we're asking the committee to consider, the term sheet from Pinnacle allows us to get $14,500,000 of a loan. So, we're only anticipating getting a loan for a little bit less than $12 million to carry. But in the resolution, the Pinnacle, and the resolution is for Pinnacle so that we can close. They're identifying the total number of dollars that they could loan to us, just to clarify that, if that becomes a question when we put it up, when you ask the committee to consider it for this for approval.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, with that, is there a motion to authorize the executive director to sign the documents for construction and financing the project?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
And with that, we will move on to the Red Oak Townhomes GMP.
So this is my quick.
Before we start,
Sorry.
Emily, I'm sorry, Emily, just a quick, it's the lawyer in me. Could you call for the noes on that motion?
Sorry, yes. Are there any noes? Okay, and hearing none, we will pass that and move on to the next agenda item.
Thank you. Sorry, Saul, I didn't mean to step on your.
Always good to have a backup.
All right, so my turn. Okay, thanks, Emily. So I'm sharing. Try to put it into. So in your package, you have Red Oak Townhomes Construction Manager GMP with the adjusted architect's fee and owner contingency. Kind of similar to what you're just looking at. It's another construction project in the recap department. We're asking for the committee to approve the requested items for the Red Oak Townhomes project that will give authorization to the executive director to sign all associated documentation on behalf of the agency. So 4 main bullet points here. The construction manager's guaranteed maximum price is at $13,216,132. This includes a $300,000 contractor contingency, so it's about 2.2% of the GMP. The architect's fee for basic services is adjusted as 6.4% of the GMP, so that puts it at $845,833. We also have other offsite additional services, which includes surveys, geotechnical surveys, and whatnot that we route through the architect. So that brings the total architect fee to $957. Owner contingency currently is at $719,059. It's about 5.4% of the GMP. So in total, we have 7.6%. I've redlined that. There's a couple of things in here that just were revisions made clearly after we sent this out. Some updated information between Monday and now. So we'll be the ask will be to approve this as revised. And I'm showing you the revisions as we go. Owner contingency went over, so the total project budget is $16,550,000. The sources to that is $6 million from the CITC loan, a community investment tax credit, and the mayor's 2018 CSP CIB budget. There's $10,550,000 available from there. So that's where the $16,550,000 comes from. We allocated a little bit more into soft cost as opposed to the contingency. The Red Oak townhomes then. So we've gone over this. This is probably actually better for me to flip to the slides which are preceding this. They're located between Dew Street and Lenore Street, immediately east of the Boscoville 3 neighborhood. There's 44 townhome style walk-up apartments in 7 buildings that are 2 to 4 stories, stick framed with surface parking. We'll be building a new Red Oak Hill Lane, which is going to be similar to Kirkpatrick Lane or Kirkpatrick Place, which was what we call the Lunar for the. It's a more. It's the pavers rather than asphalt pavement, so it's a little more detailed roadway that's required in the SP. We have that along with offsite infrastructure in Lenore Street. Those all come as requirements from either planning, public works, or Metro Water Services. Unit mix will have all types of bedroom mix, so 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. 25 of the units are designated as PBRA. And the change here from 60 to 80% AMI, 80% AMI is the more typical. It's LIHTC funding, low-income housing tax credit funding, that requires 60% AMI and below, but we do not have LIHTC on this project. So hence the revision to 80% AMI. At the November board meeting, we approved to enter negotiations with RG Anderson as our CM at risk. So they have been with us throughout the process and are providing us the GMP. The team here, EOA Architects, they provided 100% construction documents for pricing. So this is fully reviewed by Metro. Already includes an addendum or 2 in it to get us to 100% construction. So once again, the guarantee maximum price of about 13.2, including 300,000 for owner controlled contractor contingency. We get per our contract, we've indicated 60 days to approve the GMP. The date of substantial completion, if we do that by July 11th, would be August 31st, with a final completion a month later in September. If we approve next Tuesday, that puts us certainly ahead of those dates. We should factor in, barring any other delays, that the project would be on time for a July substantial completion and an August final completion.
Thank you for the presentation, Mike. One quick question. So I'm assuming the amended new total project budget, we are going to be increasing the CITC loan in order to cover that?
So Mike, let me address that. So the CITC is $6 million. Available money from the mayor's office was $10,550,000. And so the GMP was bringing us in about 16,510,000, 511, and that was leaving about $40,000 of mayor's money on the table. So we wanted to bring the mayor's money into the project to see what as contingency and to cover some infrastructure costs instead of trying to return money back to the city that's of a small amount. So that was the small adjustment up.
Thank you, Buck. So I realize that we are at meeting time, and so I think we have two options here. We can continue discussion and vote, or we can defer the vote to our next committee meeting without an addition. Preferences of commissioners.
I suggest we continue the meeting and vote, and end the meeting following the vote.
Okay. Any other questions for Mike? Hearing none, is there a motion to authorize the executive director to sign the associated documents with this project?
So moved.
A second. Is there a second?
Second. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Ms. Bax.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Those in favor, I'll say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, can you signal by saying no? And with that, the motion passes. So we will be deferring the other we didn't cover today to our next meeting prior to the board meeting. And with that, I am going to adjourn our meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.